For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Psalm 51, verse 3. Adrian had lost his mother and father 21 days ago. Since then, he hadn't been able to sleep properly. Some nights, he passed out on the couch. Other nights, he woke before dawn and stared at the ceiling. Every time he woke up, his mind went back to the same moment. The last phone call. His mother had called while Adrian was at a party. The music was loud. His friends were laughing. The glass in his hand was cold. In that moment, everything in the room felt closer than his mother's voice. "We miss you," she had said. Adrian looked at the crowd. "I miss you too, Mom. But I can't come this week. We'll talk later." There was a short silence. "Then we'll come see you," his mother said. Adrian answered without thinking. "We'll see. We'll talk later." Then he hung up. That later never came. The next morning his parents left home. It was raining. The road was slick. They noticed the truck coming around the bend too late. By that morning, the family Adrian had kept putting off seeing was already gone from his life. After the funeral, the house stayed crowded for a few days. People came, hugged him, offered condolences. Then they all left. What remained were unwashed glasses, half-finished meals, and sympathy calls that kept ringing. His friends didn't want to leave him alone in that house. Claire was the one who suggested Blackthorn Hall. "You need to get out of the city for a few days," she said. "You don't have to talk. We just shouldn't stay here." Adrian didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. Blackthorn Hall was an old manor far outside the city. In photographs it looked beautiful. Stone walls, large windows, and a long private driveway. People in the nearby town knew its name, but no one liked talking about it for very long. Ethan drove, with Claire beside him. Adrian, Mason, and Nora sat in the back. As the road stretched on, the city disappeared behind them. Buildings gave way to bare trees. After a while, their phones lost signal. Mason looked out the window. "This isn't the kind of place you end up by accident," he said. "It feels like somewhere people chose to forget." Claire turned to Nora. "Are you cold?" Nora shook her head. "I'm fine." Claire still took a sweater from her bag and handed it to her. Claire had always been like that. If Nora struggled to speak, Claire spoke for her. If Nora's glass was empty, Claire filled it. If Nora was tired, Claire noticed before Nora did. Nora had lived with that for years, until the moment she stepped through the door of Blackthorn Hall. The manor appeared at the end of the road. Ethan stopped the car. For a few seconds, no one spoke. They stared at the manor in silence. It felt as though no one would argue if someone said, "Let's not go in." Claire was the first to get out. "2 nights," she said. 3 at most. Adrian opened the door, but he didn't get out right away. His eyes were fixed on the upper windows. Mason looked at him. "We can turn back if you want." Adrian shook his head. "No, it's fine." Cold air met them at the door. The entrance hall was wide, its floor covered in dark stone. Old paintings hung along the walls. Most of the faces had darkened with time, but their eyes were still visible. Some were young. Some were old. Some were barely more than children. Across from the staircase, an empty frame hung on the wall. All the other paintings were dusty. But that frame looked newly placed. Dinner that first evening passed in almost complete silence. Adrian kept staring at his plate. Claire put a little more food in front of him. "You should eat something, Adrian." Adrian picked up his fork, but he never brought it to his mouth. Claire turned to Nora. "You barely ate anything either." Nora tried to answer. You're tired," Claire said. "You should rest soon." Nora fell silent. Claire wasn't a bad person. Most of the time she was genuinely trying to help. But when Claire started protecting someone, she slowly began living their life for them without realizing it. Nora had never thought about it that way before. That evening, for the first time, it bothered her. After dinner, they drifted away from the table one by one. Once the hallways emptied, the silence of the house grew heavier. Old houses make sounds. Floorboards creak. Pipes make thin noises. Wind hums in the chimney. Those things were normal. What wasn't normal was how close some of the sounds felt. As Adrian passed the kitchen door, he caught a smell. Soap. It reminded him of the soap his mother used at home. Clean. Familiar. Adrian stopped. A few seconds later, the smell changed. The soap was gone. In its place came the damp smell of a room, one that had been shut for too long. Adrian stayed there for a moment. Then he kept walking as if nothing had happened. Claire was going upstairs when she noticed the bathroom door was open. She heard water inside. She thought the faucet was dripping. She stepped closer. The sound stopped. Claire waited for a few seconds. Then she turned on the light. The sink was dry. The bathtub was dry. But the room smelled of mud and lake weed. Nora, meanwhile, was alone in the living room. She stood in front of the large mirror. Normally she never looked at herself for long. But the Nora in the mirror looked different. She stood straighter, calmer, as if she spoke, someone might actually listen this time. Nora stepped closer to the mirror. A faint hum came from somewhere behind the mirror. The sound lasted only a moment, but it was enough to disturb the silence of the room. Nora stared at her reflection. For a moment it felt as if the person standing across from her wasn't who she was. It was who she wanted to be. Midnight had already passed. Adrian still couldn't sleep. He walked around his room for a while. He lay down, then got back up again. Just then, a soft sound came from downstairs. It seemed to be coming from the kitchen, like a plate being placed on the table or a chair shifting slightly. Adrian thought it might be Claire. He quietly went down the stairs. The hall was dark. Only a thin line of light came from under the kitchen door. He stopped in front of it. Claire. No answer came. Someone was standing near the table. Their back was turned. A finger slowly traced a crack in the wood. Adrian's breath caught. His mother always did that when she was worried. Without noticing, she would run her fingers over the scratches in the table. For a moment, Adrian stayed where he was. "Mum?" he whispered. The woman moved slightly, as if she had heard him. He took a step forward without meaning to. Then the woman slowly turned. Her face wasn't the way Adrian remembered it. It was paler. The shadows beneath her eyes were too deep, as if the darkness had begun to settle into her. A chill ran through Adrian. His throat tightened. The woman's lips parted slightly, but not a single sound came out. At that moment, Adrian remembered their last conversation. "We'll talk later." Adrian closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the kitchen was empty. By the following morning, the house had begun to feel different. The rain had thinned to a grey drizzle. Pale light came through the tall windows of the dining room, and for a while, the manor almost looked like an ordinary old house. They gathered for breakfast, but no one spoke about the night before. Claire had already decided that the smell in the bathroom had been her imagination. Adrian said nothing about the kitchen. Nora kept glancing toward the living room door, as if the mirror might be listening. It was easier that way. If nobody said it out loud, then nothing had really happened. Only Ethan seemed restless. Halfway through breakfast, he set down his cup. "The rain's letting up," he said. "Maybe we should head back today." Everyone expected Adrian to agree. He was the reason they were all being so careful, so quiet. But Adrian shook his head. "Not yet." He said it calmly, without looking up from his plate. "It's the first place I've been able to breathe since the funeral." Nobody knew what to say to that. Grief made its own rules, and none of them felt they had the right to argue with his. So they stayed. Later in the morning, Ethan and Mason went out to check the car. The engine started on the first try, and somehow that made Ethan feel worse instead of better. It was as if the house didn't need to trap them, as if it already knew they weren't leaving. While they were outside, Claire crossed the entrance hall, and it found her again. Faint, but unmistakable. The smell of lake water, mud and weed and cold. She stopped, closed her eyes, and waited until it passed. She didn't tell anyone. Nora spent most of the day among the portraits. She moved slowly along the walls, studying the darkened faces one by one, the way people read gravestones in an old churchyard. Now and then her lips moved slightly, as if she were answering something. When Claire found her there in the afternoon, Nora was standing in front of the empty frame again. "They all lived here," Nora said quietly. Claire frowned. "Who did?" "The people in the paintings." Nora tilted her head. "The house remembers all of them." "Nora, how could you possibly know that?" Nora didn't answer. She looked at the empty frame a moment longer, then walked away down the corridor. As the afternoon wore on, the house grew restless. Footsteps were heard in the hallway, then suddenly stopped. Sometimes it sounded like a door had closed upstairs, but whenever someone checked, every door was standing half open. Throughout the day, they caught glimpses of Adrian in places he could not possibly have been. Claire said she saw him at the top of the stairs. Ethan swore he had passed by the living room door. Mason saw Adrian enter the room at the end of the corridor. He followed him immediately. "Adrian?" He opened the door. The room was empty. For a few seconds he stood in the doorway. Then he heard Adrian's voice behind him. "I'm here." The voice came from the other end of the corridor. Mason froze. Adrian was standing there, but Mason had just seen him walk into that room. Nora began speaking less and less, but her silence wasn't the same as before. It wasn't fear. There was a small, unsettling peace on her face, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Claire noticed it quickly. "Nora," she said, "don't leave my side, okay?" Nora looked at her. "I'm not Lydia." Claire was startled. "What?" "But you always act like I am." Claire couldn't answer for a few seconds. The words had hit her harder than she expected. "I'm just trying to protect you." Nora's eyes drifted briefly toward the empty wall at the end of the corridor. "I know," she said. That evening, the rain grew heavier. Adrian sometimes stood staring into empty rooms, as if someone inside was speaking to him. Nora stood at the end of the corridor, staring at the blank wall. She waited there for a long time without moving, as if she were listening to something. After a while, Claire found Nora standing alone near the staircase. "Nora, have you seen Adrian?" Nora answered without thinking. "He was here a moment ago." "When?" "Just now. He passed through the corridor." "But there was no one in the corridor." Ethan went to the front door. He tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't turn. He tried again. Then he turned and looked at Mason. "Did you lock this?" Mason frowned. "What?" "I'm asking if you locked the door." This time Mason got angry. "Do you really think I'd joke about that right now?" Ethan didn't answer. He slammed his shoulder into the door. The door didn't move at all. Mason stepped closer and tried the handle himself. Then the expression on his face changed. "That's not normal," he said. Ethan tried a few more times. The handle still wouldn't turn. Mason went to the windows. The latches turned, but the frames would not move, as if they had been painted shut 100 years ago. Ethan crossed the house and tried the kitchen door at the back. It was the same. The house was not locked. It was sealed. For a moment, everyone looked at one another. Claire finally broke the silence. "We can't stay here," she said. "This house isn't normal." Ethan nodded. "We leave as soon as the sun comes up." Mason looked toward the stairs. "First, we need to find Adrian." Claire looked around. "Adrian!" she called. No answer came. Mason walked toward the stairs. "I'll check," he said, and went up. When he came back a while later, his face was even paler. "He's not there," he said. "He's not in any of the rooms." As the night dragged on, the silence inside the house became harder to endure. Just before dawn, Claire saw wet footprints in the hallway. At first, she thought it was one of Ethan's stupid jokes, thinking that was easier than accepting the truth. But when she stepped closer, she stopped. The footprints were muddy. Thin pieces of lake weed were caught inside them. A chill ran through Claire. Then she slowly looked down at her hands. Her fingers were wrinkled, as if they had been in cold water for a long time. That was when Lydia came to mind. Her twin sister. When they were children, they had been playing by the lake. Lydia had gone too close to the water. Claire had been too late to stop her. Then Lydia's foot slipped. She fell into the water. Lydia struggled in the lake. She tried to call for help. Claire froze. She had been too frightened to move. Then Claire slowly lifted her head. In the darkness at the end of the corridor, a little girl was standing there. Her hair was stuck to her face. Water dripped from her. Claire took one step back. "No," she said. "No, you're not her." The girl lifted her head. Claire's knees weakened. The girl's lips parted slightly. In a voice so low it was almost a whisper, she said, "Claire, help me." Claire didn't sleep again that night. By morning, Adrian was still nowhere to be found. The sounds they had heard through the night seemed to have gone silent with him. Mason checked the kitchen first, then the living room. Then he went upstairs. Adrian's bedroom door was slightly open. "Mason!" Ethan called from downstairs. Mason didn't answer. He stepped into the room. The bed was untouched. Adrian's bag was still sitting in the corner. It looked as if Adrian had never lain in that bed since the day they arrived. At first glance, the room seemed empty. Just as he was about to leave, a small sound came from beneath the large wardrobe. A click. Mason stopped. A rat suddenly shot out from the darkness beneath the wardrobe, then ran along the wall. Mason's face tightened. For a few seconds he stared at the wardrobe. Then he slowly opened the door. At first, the wardrobe looked empty. There was only darkness inside. Then Mason saw the shape. Adrian was in there. But he was darker than the darkness around him. His face, his hands, his clothes, all of it had turned black, as if the shadows of the house had soaked into him. Only his outline showed he was there at all. He was not moving. He looked as if he had been part of that darkness for days. Mason's breath caught. He left the wardrobe door open. For a few seconds he just stared at Adrian. Then he slowly began backing away. He couldn't take his eyes off the wardrobe. Step by step he moved backward. He was almost at the door. That was when he realized someone was standing behind him. He slowly turned. Adrian stood just outside the doorway. The dark shape in the wardrobe was still there. So was Adrian in the doorway. Both were there. For a moment, Mason froze where he stood. Then he suddenly turned and ran. He crossed the corridor and headed for the stairs. His feet tangled beneath him. When he reached the top of the staircase, his foot slipped. He tried to catch his balance, but he couldn't hold on. He struck the railing and fell. The sound of his body hitting the floor below echoed through the house. Then everything went silent again. Claire ran to the top of the stairs. "Mason!" No answer came. Ethan came up beside her. They looked down. Mason lay motionless at the bottom of the staircase. Ethan hurried down and knelt beside him. A few seconds later, he looked up at Claire and shook his head. Claire came down slowly, holding the railing. "We have to go," Ethan said. Just then, Nora appeared at the top of the stairs. She stood there silently. Claire looked up. "Nora, come on." Nora didn't move. The darkness behind the staircase looked different now. The end of the corridor seemed deeper than before, as if the walls had pulled back. Behind Nora, the inside of the house seemed to stretch on endlessly. Corridors, staircases, doors. All of them seemed layered over one another. For a moment, a massive shadow formed behind Nora, as if the entire manor was standing behind her. Nora tilted her head slightly, but she wasn't looking at Claire. She was listening to the darkness behind her. Claire took one step forward. "Nora, come." Nora didn't answer. "Please, I can't leave you here." "You're not afraid of leaving me, Claire," Nora said. "You're afraid of not being able to control me." Claire froze. "I love you. I know." Nora's voice was calm, almost peaceful. "But for the first time, no one is speaking for me." Claire began to cry. "Nora, please." Nora took one step back. The darkness behind the staircase seemed to reach toward her. It had no clear shape. Only the walls, the ceiling, and the shadows seemed to lean in the same direction for a moment. Nora looked at Claire one last time. "I'm not coming." Then she walked into the darkness. Somewhere below them, a latch clicked. Ethan looked toward the entrance hall. The front door was standing open. Outside it was light. The rain had stopped. Grey morning light spread over the garden. Ethan grabbed Claire's arm. "Now," he said. They crossed the entrance hall. As they passed the staircase, Claire's eyes caught the frame on the wall, the one that had been empty. It was no longer empty. Something faint was forming inside it. Slowly, like a photograph developing in the dark. The shape of a woman, standing straight, calm. Claire recognized the posture before she recognized the face. It was Nora, and for the first time she looked like someone no one could speak for. Claire did not stop. She could not. Together, they stepped through the door. They went down the wet stone steps. When they reached the car, Ethan opened the door. Claire stopped for a moment. Without meaning to, she lifted her head and looked back at the house. In the morning light, Blackthorn Hall looked ordinary. Silent, as if nothing that had happened during the night had been real. Claire's eyes moved to the upper windows. For a moment, she thought someone was standing there. Then the shape disappeared. Claire got into the car and Ethan started the engine. The car slowly pulled away from the manor. In the rearview mirror, Blackthorn Hall grew smaller and smaller, until finally it vanished among the trees.